The injuries are catching up to them. They're about to fall out of the wild card altogether, and I think they're like 5.5 games behind the Twins now. So it's going to be an uphill battle, and people are really hurt. So,
Damn. Are the Twins leading the division?
yeah, we'll see. Even if they make it to the playoffs, I'm not expecting big things, but I hope they at least make it.
I will say it is harder to make the playoffs in baseball than a lot of the other.
It is, yeah. All right. Shall we do this?
Yeah, why not? Let's go.
All right. Hello and welcome, everyone, to Champs Lunch, a Schmoedown podcast from the hosts of Some Like It Scott. I'm Scott Harvey, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Scott Shelton. Scott, today we will be running through the gambit of matches that we got in August 2019 in the movie Trivia Schmoedown. It was a very busy month in the Schmoedown, mainly in the singles division, but we also had one of the biggest teams matches of all time, and something we did not see coming, certainly coming into this month. Not something we talked about in our last episode because no one really saw it coming. But we'll get to that in just a second. First, Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm recovering from the fallout of our very stressful 2.5 hour, well, really stressful hour, a couple hours after our live stream last night when we thought everything had been bad and we lost the stream. But we were impatient. Well, I was impatient more so than either of us. So I've mostly recovered from that after having a couple stress streams about it, probably.
Yeah, the kinks of working out a new system of doing these streams on YouTube. There's always going to be some terrifying moments, but that was something we had not expected. But luckily, patience is a virtue, as they teach us, and the whole episode is up there now. And I hope that you guys will go check it out either on YouTube or over on the podcast feed where you're listening to this.
Yeah, and I realized we didn't even say it was our best of the decade episode last night.
Yeah.
So that's what it was. It was a big episode, 2.5 hours.
It was. We had a great discussion, and yeah, people should definitely check it out because we worked pretty hard on making that happen. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right, Scott, let's get into the Schmoedown action for August 2019 because we have a lot to cover. Of course, we did do our singles Ultimate Schmoedown bracket predictions. You can also find that on YouTube or over on the podcast feed or on Facebook as well, because we streamed that episode as well. So for that reason, we won't be predicting really any matches to come in the next month because it's going to be taken up basically by the singles tournament. We do have the Rocky exhibition match between Christian and Dagnino, and there's that undercard match in Arizona between the Wildberries and Late to the Party. But other than that, it's going to be all singles. So we're going to talk about a little bit of kayfabe at the end. But first, let's get into those live events. We always like to kick off our discussion by talking about the live events. And we had 2 this month. And the one we didn't know that we were going to have coming into the month was the Shire Wolves versus Corruption live stream. This match, of course, came about because the Shire Wolves retired. Out of the blue, kind of, Christian announced that they were going to be having a special on the YouTube channel in which he would be sitting down with the Shire Wolves to talk about their careers. And I think from that point on, everyone kind of suspected that maybe some sort of announcement like this was coming, or we didn't really know what the degree of it was going to be, whether it was, one person stepping away, because when these specials usually do happen, of course, the same one happened with Sam Levine. It usually spells retirement. And that, unfortunately, it wasn't just one person stepping away. Both of the Shire Wolves decided to step away from the Schmoedown. Clark Wolf is going to be on the desk for some matches coming up. She has expressed some interest in doing that, but we won't see her playing. Rachel has said that maybe we will see her play next year in an exhibition match or something like that. But it seems like they're pretty much done for now. And hats off to them. They accomplished so much. I do think they're probably the greatest team of all time, right up there with the Patriots. And what they did for representation in the league as well was massive. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and talking about the aftermath of the match. But the match, their first time facing off against Corruption, of course. Mike and Rachel with a long rivalry and singles and intergeekdom. But this is their first time facing off in the teams division. And I think we kind of felt like coming into this match that the X factor was going to be Chance Ellison because, we know what the other 3 people can do and we know what Chance can do, but he is still young. He is still relatively new to the Schmoedown and relatively new to big matches under the lights like this one. But Chance did not disappoint and really set the tone from the beginning with a perfect round in round one, and kind of gave Corruption a lead that they would hold on to for most of the match. Of course, it helped that once again they were able to get James Bond in round two. And run through that as they normally do. It seems like they've had an unbelievable string of luck, whether it's Kalinowski in singles or Corruption in teams, with getting James Bond on the wheel. And of course, being able to run through that is huge. But the buzzer round, it looked like the Shire Wolves might be able to gain some momentum back. Rachel got the first two questions right, but then Chance came back and restored the Corruption with a 4-point lead, I believe, going into round number 5. And the Shire Wolves had an uphill battle ahead of them. They got their first two questions, however, and Corruption missed their first two questions, missed their 2 and 3, which meant that Corruption needed to answer their 5-pointer, which they were able to do, bouncing it back to the Shire Wolves. Scott, at this point, I was standing on my feet in my room watching this on my computer, watching the live stream. Really wanted
I think I was doing the same.
Yeah, I really wanted the Shire Wolves to go out on a high note, knowing, of course, that their legacy would be intact no matter what happened in the match. Yep. It would have been amazing and awesome to see them pull out the last answer, but that's not what happened. They were unable to come up with the answer to a question about 12 monkeys. And as a result, Corruption is the new champion, giving Mike Kalinowski his second belt, the first person to win 2 belts in the same year. Because, of course, he's got the Inner Geekdom belt and now the team's belt. And so a great accomplishment for him, of course. But tough to see Rachel and Clark go down like that. I think you'd agree with me.
Yeah, I think Rachel won the Inner Geekdom and the team's belt in the same year as well. So I don't think he's the first person to do it. But
no. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Because
I don't know what Christian was talking about then, because I think
they won it back at Collision, so they lost it and won it back. But I think that when it's hard to understand. I mean, so I guess to back up 1 second, in the number 1 contenders match with the Founding Fathers, we talked about how critical Mike was for that match and how, he had a perfect game in that match. And then you switch over, and this is the hallmark of the best teams in the league, that both players are fantastic. And, one player is, 1,000% on one day. And then even if they're just even slightly below that level at this top tier of the Schmoedown, their other team member can pick up any sort of slack at all. Not that Mike was slacking off whatsoever, but Chance coming back here, almost having a perfect game himself. The only question he missed was his 2-pointers or his 3-point question. I think he had the 2-point question. It was a classics question that Mike knew the answer to, but Chance didn't. And I think that just goes to show how good of a team they are. I mean, we've talked with that exact same structure exactly about the Shire Wolves before, about how when Clark may have had an off day, Rachel pick up the slack, and then last season when Rachel had an off day, Clark would pick up the slack, and that's exactly what you've seen here with Corruption in the last 2 matches. And it's difficult to understate exactly how much Chance was the X factor, made the difference. Not only did he have that first round, you alluded to this, but when Corruption was a little bit on their heels, their backs weren't necessarily against the wall yet, of course. But, when they were on their heels in round 4 in the speed round, Rachel Cushing getting the first 2 questions right, Chance is the one who buzzed in for the next 3 questions and got every one of them right to restore that 4-point lead that you were talking about. And that made all the difference, because maybe they over-strategized a little bit in round 5. We've seen it happen. Not for the first time this year. We've seen that happen, and we saw it with Inky and the Brain overthinking their round 3 strategy against the Family, I think it was. And they even admitted after the match that's kind of what they did. They kind of went against what their normal standard structure would have been, that Mike would take the 2 and Chance would take the 3, because they thought Chance might know classics better than Mike, I suppose. I don't really know what the logic would be there. But they messed up the strategy a little bit and almost paid for it. I thought they were going to pay for it, but then got a big 5-point pull there. And then the Shire Wolves, a deep cut on 12 monkeys. It's understandable that it's not a given that you know the answer to that question, but an absolutely incredible run, 1.5 long run, maybe even a little bit more. I don't know exactly when it was, but an incredible 1.5 run. and you can understand the toll that it's taken on both these people, particularly Rachel, who's been competing in every division over the course of that time period. And it's obviously extremely sad to see the two of them go, but what better tribute for them to go than this type of match, going down to the final question, and then to get the interviews, the tributes afterwards that really hit several chords, all the chords, maybe you could say, all the heartstrings. And it was a fitting tribute, even though it doesn't necessarily make up for the fact that they're still going to be leaving us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the aftermath of the match was really the highlight of this event for me. As good as the match was, seeing those tributes and the long tribute video that Eric from Nerd Chronic, who does an incredible job with all of the Schmoedown promos, put together. But this in particular, I think was so great because you not only did you have every competitor you could imagine in there, but you also had a ton of fans and some of the people from the fan leagues and the reaction channels and all the people who are as much a part of this community as the people who play in the Schmoedown. That's one of the things that makes the Schmoedown so great and why we do this podcast, because the Schmoedown community makes the fans feel like such an intimate part of the group, and all you have to do is go to a live event to see that firsthand. But even if you don't, seeing the way that they included so many fans and stuff in this video shows, that what Christian has created. And I think, shout out obviously to the Shire Wolves as well. And what they did for this league cannot be overstated. But shout out to Christian Harloff as well, because, he's the one who created this community. He's the one who created this game. And, he has to be proud looking out at what he's created on a night like this and seeing people literally moved to tears by a movie trivia show. That of course the Shire Wolves' impact on the league has something to do with that, but it was because of that community that the Shire Wolves did have such an impact on the league. And Christian is really the one, as much as probably more than anyone, who created this community and makes everyone feel like such a great part. So nothing but praise for the Shire Wolves, for Christian, and for the Schmoedown community. Do what?
Give a little credit to Mark too.
Yeah, of course. And the entire Schmoedown community for letting us all be a part of something really special. And this was just the latest example, but one of the best examples. Listening to what all those competitors had to say, and seeing Kalinowski and John Roca and Mark and Draco actually come out into the studio and talk about what the Shire Wolves meant to them and meant to this league. It was all from the heart. It was all authentic. Because I've said this before. I've said this after we went to Houston. At their heart, most of these people are fans of the game, just like we are. And you got to see that on full display in this tribute to the Shire Wolves. And I can't think of a better way to send off two of the best players that this league has ever seen.
Absolutely.
All right, Scott. So that was the surprise live event that we got in the month of August. The second live event, which we knew was coming, just happened this past Saturday evening in New York City. Two huge singles matches, starting off with a first-round tournament Ultimate Schmoedown match between Ethan Big Time Irwin and Haley Fouch. Scott, I think obviously if you saw our prediction special, we both had Ethan Irwin winning the tournament. So we had a lot riding on this match in terms of our brackets. And it's safe to say that our boy Big Time did not disappoint. Haley, obviously a really strong player, but Ethan was able to make fairly quick work of her. And this match turned out to be kind of the formality that we had an inkling it might be.
Yeah, it ended up being a TKO, which, when we talked about it, I don't know if we necessarily thought it would be a TKO, but we weren't surprised that it wasn't necessarily a difficult win for Ethan. I think Haley had a little bit of trouble getting started early on. She had, I don't want to say some easy misses that she missed out on, but some ones that I'd imagine after the match she was kicking herself a little bit, and that put her in a hole early. And when you get in a hole early to Ethan, the dirt just starts getting piled on you, and it gets tougher and tougher to dig your way out. She didn't get horror in round two, which is really the thing that she would have needed to keep it closer, or at least to force Ethan to answer one of his third round questions, because honestly, the way Ethan steamrolled through his category, I think he got 7 points maybe in his own category. It was going to always, even in a close, even if Haley could have kept it close in round 1, she probably wouldn't have had a lead going into round 3. And so, unfortunately, it did end up being a TKO. But it's just kind of how it shook out, which is desperately what my bracket needed, because the other matches we're going to talk about in a second, I both predicted wrong. So
Yeah, Haley, maybe the lights got to her. Who knows? She was up against a buzzsaw, and I'm sure we'll get to see her most likely in the team's tournament playing with the Scream Queens, and maybe they can pull off a first round upset there. But a tough draw for her. But I know that we'll see her back in the singles division soon and probably doing good things. So. On the other side, Ethan moves on as we expected, and he looks like he's back and in full form. So I'm at least after this first match, I'm feeling good about having him going all the way. But stranger things have happened, and we'll talk about some of the strange things that have already happened in the tournament.
Yeah, and it's second round competition. I mean, there will be a sharp increase in the difficulty curve.
Sure.
In the second round, regardless of who comes out of the Chance versus Bibiani match. It could be that rematch. We talked about it already, so no need to spend too much on it. But it could be the rematch from last year's tournament, or it could be Bibiani, who he's lost to already. So a lot could be riding on that quarterfinal match for our brackets.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. And the other match we got in New York was the singles title match. But before we talk about that, we should talk about how we got there, because, of course, we had 2 matches in this sort of gauntlet to determine who was going to face off against Paul Oyama at this event. First, we saw Mike Kalinowski against Ben Bateman, 2 of the biggest personalities in this league. And the trash talk going into the match, really, it didn't disappoint. The match
Top
on the other... What's that?
Top banter.
Yeah, it was. The match, on the other hand, maybe wasn't quite as high scoring as we expected. Both players struggled with a couple of answers in round 1. I believe this was the match where Mike put Blade Runner 2046 instead of Blade Runner 2049 for an answer.
He did. He did.
Yeah. So a little bit of rust there for Mike, maybe not playing in singles for a bit. Going up against...
Actually might have been the Snyder match. I'm not sure. I watched them back.
I thought it was the Ben match, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. In one of them, he said Blade Runner 2046.
Yeah. But Ben actually led this match going into the final round, I believe. I believe he had a 1-point lead. However, in that final round, he wasn't able to come up with the answer to his final question. And Mike Kalinowski was able to come out on top and move on, again, continuing his huge hot streak that he has been on, whether it's winning the team's belt, winning the Inner Geekdoms belt. He really did look unstoppable after this match. Even when he didn't play his best match, he was still able to come out on top. And looking across the aisle to Ben Bateman, I mean, the Horseman curse continues.
Yeah, they're going to need to break that sometime soon. We'll see if Orlando is the place where they can break it. But yeah, it was a tough one. It was a tough one for Ben. Obviously, my guy. I'm not wearing my Team Bateman shirt right now, but he didn't have his best match. I still think it was an overall really good match, though. I think there was some struggles and maybe some misses that you'd hope that neither competitor would make in future matches. But still, it was a good match. I think that it's still proof that between him and Kalinowski has a belt, but the people who aren't going to be the people of the people competing in the tournament, they proved that they are worthy of it. Even if they're not Bibiani, if they're not Irwin, they're still in the conversation of best singles players out there right now. And so Bateman holding down the fort of best player without a belt. Still, I think it's fair to say, and we'll see. We talked about how with that loss, Ben ended up on the left side of the bracket, which is probably the better side of the bracket to be on. Mm-hmm. And anything can happen in the tournament. We saw it already happen between Stacey Howard, and Mark Riley, which we'll talk about a little later on. But hopefully, he has a clearer path to at least the semifinals than even Ethan Irwin, for example. So disappointing loss for him. I think that he'll be kicking himself, and probably every person in the Horseman right now is kicking themselves up after their most recent losses. But we'll see. He probably has the best chance to redeem the Horseman the quickest. I mean, 1, because Mark Riley's already out of the tournament. But 2, because I guess Roca could redeem it. I just don't see Roca going that far. I just think Ben has the best chance to redeem the Horseman right now.
Yeah, it is good for him that he'll get right back on the horse, no pun intended, and get to play in the tournament. Probably get at least one win under his belt.
Yeah.
You would think, which is going to do worlds for his confidence and for the confidence of the horsemen as a whole, because it's got to be low right now, given the string of losses that they're on. But
Yeah.
they're still going to get their chances. They certainly are. But after this match, we saw Robert Meyer Burnett, the interim commissioner, imposing his will, and instead of making Snyder wait to play Kalinowski, or making Kalinowski wait to play Snyder, rather, calling for the match to happen immediately. So we had our interviews, and then the players came back out. Kalinowski came back out, and Snyder came out for this number one contender match. Of course, big narrative going into this was Snyder's third chance at a number one contender slot. He lost to Harloff the first time. He lost to Bibiani last time in that match, where he really sort of had a meltdown. And so it was kind of, could he get over the hill? Again, both players struggled a little bit throughout the match.
Yeah.
Round two especially was rough for Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Mike was out of the match in
Yeah.
round two. I think he got like 3 points, and Snyder stole like half his questions, I think. But then Snyder struggled almost just as much as him.
Yeah, he did. It really fell over to Snyder to sort of put Mike away in the second round, and Snyder wasn't really able to do that. He was able to pick up a few points, enough to have a solid, I believe, 3 or 4 point lead going into the last round. But he could have easily pushed the match into almost knockout range if he had had a better second round. So he kept Kalinowski around, and you just wondered going into this third round with the run that Mike had been on, was he going to be able to? Did he have a comeback in him? Was the magic still there? And it wasn't there anymore. I don't know if the having to play back-to-back matches got to him, if maybe fatigue set in, but he looked a little rattled on his last two questions, his 3 and his 5, which he was unable to hit. And he was unable to hit either of them. And Jeff Snyder was the winner of the match. He did get over that hill and get himself to New York for that number one contender match. And I think, Scott, the manager of the year debate has been raging on. But I think this, after the Odd Couple lost the belt again, I think Roxy maybe dropped a little bit down on the list, but I think this thrust Roxy back into the conversation for sure, up there with Kaiser and with Grayson Ken over what they've been able to do with Corruption, which I think can't be discounted as well. As much as the hyped up narrative has been Roxy versus Kaiser. I think Roxy's back in there now. I don't know if I would put her number one on my list, but it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I guess to tackle the match, and then I'll share my two cents on that topic about manager of the year as well, because it came up at the live event too with the I think Kaiser had the hashtag MOTY at the end of one of his videos there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the match, you talk about Kalinowski looking tired, and you don't know, maybe it's back-to-back matches, maybe it's just the culmination of all these matches he was playing. I mean, granted, this was taped before the Corruption, or the Shire Wolves versus Corruption match, so the order that we're seeing them is always a little bit mixed when you have a live event interspersed with matches that have been taped. But I think in both matches, I talked more about Ben in the last one, but to kind of fuse both matches together here, I think one thing that I noticed even in the match with Bateman is that Kalinowski looked really exhausted, and that was even more true in the next match as well against Snyder. I mean, I'm sure that they knew that they would be playing another match after the first one.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that wouldn't be thrown on them like that in a surprise form. I mean, obviously it is for us with the kayfabe, but I think that it just the weight of knowing there was another match maybe coming after, and that was exhausting enough. Okay.
And I also think that the way Mike plays the game probably has an impact on that as well. Like, I think if you're talking about somebody like Ethan Irwin, who's just very, very relaxed, I think he probably wouldn't have worn on him so much to play back-to-back matches. But Mike, he commits so much, he expends so much emotion in a single match.
Yeah, he's so intense.
Yeah, maybe he was exhausted, to your point.
Yeah, and so, yeah, it's probably a combination of the two things, right? Like his high intensity way of playing the game, the fact that he hadn't yet won the team's belt, but also thinking about that on the horizon, and he had his number one contenders match with against the Founding Fathers with Corruption. I think that it probably all just added up to a little bit too much, but it's great to also see him right back in the tournament, just like Ben. I think after the match he looked tired, but he also looked hungry again. And yeah, he made a couple sloppy errors. Whether they were all in the Snyder match or they were spread across the Snyder and Bateman match, honestly, I can't remember. Probably spread across both. But I think that's another sign that he probably was a little bit tired, and especially the rookie move that he made in, I believe it was round 3 with his 3-point question.
Yeah.
Flash Gordon.
So yeah, we should really talk about that.
Right. So he got his 2-point question correct, and then his 3-point question, it was a question about Ted, but the answer was Flash Gordon, and he did not listen to the question carefully enough and said
the actor's name. Yeah,
he said the actor's name rather than the character's name or the movie's name. The movie.
I think it was asking for the movie. Yeah,
asking for the movie that the two people that Ted and
cameoed from. Yeah.
And he didn't listen to the question carefully enough. And Christian was going to give it to him right if he just stopped talking, which I disagree with. He would need to finish the movie name, because if he had stopped at Flash, Christian would have given it to him according to Christian. But that wasn't the whole. That doesn't matter. But the point is, a lapse in focus, a lapse in. It was a rookie mistake. He admitted after the match that it was a rookie mistake, and I think that, again, that's another sign of exhaustion, of just slightly like a slight lapse in focus just from the number of matches that he'd been playing, and that intensity that you're talking about, that intensity at which he plays the matches, even in that specific question. And so I don't think that's a mistake he's going to make again now when he's back here in the singles tournament. Whenever he plays his first match against Janine, a rematch from earlier this year, I don't think we'll be seeing that same mistake. But I think it also shows that Snyder, and you can also talk about this when we talk about the live event, the championship match in a second, is just maybe the most clever tactical player of the game. He doesn't miss a beat when it comes to the rules. He probably studies the rules more than he studies movies, which is all fair and good because it's the rules.
Yeah, and I do think that, you talk about what Christian said, but I think for the most part, this was handled the right way. Everyone was very careful about what they were, to say and to not say. When Mike was kind of acting confused about, why everyone was, pausing when he gave this answer, I think that they handled everything the right way, and the right result was ultimately reached. And yeah, Snyder definitely played a part of that in his understanding of the rules as well, because of course he has been embroiled in controversy before. So that's probably why
he seeks out controversy, though. To be
fair. he does, but that was nothing of his own doing right there.
No.
But yeah, did you want to say something about the Manager of the Year conversation?
I do, yeah. So I think a lot of it depends on how you define the Manager of the Year. If you're talking about pure results oriented, and I think that's how many people think about Manager of the Year, I have a hard time putting Roxy above Kaiser, even maybe above Corruption's managers, Grace and Ken. But when you talk about what you're able to do for your faction members and coaching them and managing them in that way, I think it's hard to dispute that the person who manages the best, and like an individual the best, is Roxy. And you talk about what she's able to do for Snyder. I think you see it in this match that we're talking about right now, and you definitely see it in the live event match that we're going to talk about in a second. She's just the best manager from getting the most out of her particular player. Now, maybe you can say most players don't need to be managed as much as Snyder needs to be managed. I don't know enough inside baseball in the Schmoedown to be able to say that, but I think it's really hard to dispute that she adds a lot to what Snyder accomplishes in the league. I can't assess as much how much Kaiser, etc., or Grace and Ken add to their individual players, especially while they're playing the match, because that's really all that we can see. They may work miracles for them outside matches.
Yeah,
they have a role outside the ring as well. But from what we see as spectators of the sport, it's hard to dispute that Roxy maybe does the most as a manager for her person. Again, I think it maybe ultimately boils down to how you weight in the ring versus out of the ring, and results versus bettering your players. But I think I probably would go Roxy for one of those definitions, and Kaiser right now with the other definition.
Yeah, because I think talking about what goes on outside the ring, I do think that Kaiser practices a lot with Smets, and a lot of the whole dungeon and Smets, practicing with all these flashcards and everything. I think Kaiser plays a huge part in that, because I know that they are friends, and Kaiser was the reason that Smets really got in the league in the first place because he talked to Christian. He's been friends with Christian, and after Smets tried and failed the first time to get in the league, Kaiser really begged Christian to give him another chance, and he did. So, it's an interesting conversation, and one we'll have more at the end of the year because, of course, there's still a lot to happen. And but talking about the title match that happened in New York, you talked about Roxy playing an impact during the match, and I think this was an example. Like we saw, or we could hear her from the crowd, especially during the climactic moments of the match, calling out and encouraging Jeff. And Jeff is obviously, we've seen what can happen when he gets down on himself in a match. He can completely shut down, but to Roxy's credit, he didn't do that here. It was a close match, Scott, against Paul Oyama. This was one of these more defensive title matches, where lower scoring, makes me think of like the Harloff Merle match from back in the day. Paul Oyama actually missed all three of his round 5 questions. Snyder looked kind of dead in the water going into the last round. He looked dead in the water at several points in this match, to be quite honest. But going into that last round, you really thought that Snyder was pretty much toast with the breadth of knowledge that Oyama had. But Oyama got 3 questions about things he didn't know. And maybe, they were harder than your average 2 or 3 pointer, but nevertheless, he wasn't able to come up with them. And Snyder actually had a chance to win the match if he could have hit his 5-pointer, but he was unable to do so. The match ended up going to sudden death, tied at 15, I believe. And on the first sudden death question, Paul Oyama was able to pull out the answer about Robert Duvall's cameo in, I forget what movie it was, but and Snyder was unable to come up with the answer despite Roxy's encouragement. And Paul Oyama was able to retain the belt 6-0, a incredible start to singles like we've never seen before in the Schmoedown. And even though he didn't have his best match, kind of like we talked about with Mike against Ben, even though he didn't have his best match, he found a way to win. And that's what you got to do as a champion. Sometimes you're not going to have, your best match every single title defense, but you want to be one of the greatest champions. Like, you got to find a way to win no matter what. And that's what Paul did here. He's going to have, another challenge before the end of the year, whoever comes out of that singles tournament. But he's shown now that he is up to pretty much whatever challenge he has to face in this league. And it was an impressive win for him.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been thinking about, I agree with everything you say about the match. I think Snyder, really lost his head somewhere in the middle of this match, and thank God for Roxy, because
round 1 he struggled too. Yeah.
Well, round 1 he struggled, but I'm thinking like round 3 when when Paul got Spinner's choice and chose Harry Potter. Like it seemed like Snyder was about ready to just throw in the towel, and if Roxy had not been able to encourage him even after he did, I think he ended up. But it was a 4-point swing there, so he had a massive deficit even going into round 4. And I think if not for Roxy, it could have really gone off the rails for him.
And that's also a smart play by Oyama, right? Like, Harry Potter, probably not his absolute strongest category, but he put it on the wheel for a situation just like the one that he got in this match when he hit Spinner's choice in that 3rd round and was able to pick the category, because obviously Jeff doesn't know anything about Harry Potter. So
it's a next level of strategy that I wonder if people will adopt, because he left spinners and opponents on the wheel, which is very strategic as well. I don't even think I've ever seen it left on the wheel for a title match before. You might be able to correct me there.
He usually gets left on the wheel, I think.
Left on the wheel?
Yeah.
No, it almost always gets taken off the wheel in title matches.
Okay, agree to disagree.
We will consult Frankie.
Yeah,
Frankie numbers on how often Spinners gets left on the wheel, but I think that it gets left off pretty commonly with title matches. But he left it on, and I don't know how many wheel slices they get to put on the wheel each. Maybe 1 or 2. Is it 2? I think.
I think it's 2.
Yeah. Well, regardless, he took one of his ability to put one of his strengths on the board. He forewent that to put what he was a known weakness of Jeff. Yeah. And that is a tactical decision of itself. And that shows some confidence in your own ability to, yes, you may know Harry Potter well, maybe you prefer to hit other things in that in round two, particularly. But because you put a real threat there, if you get spinner's choice or if he hits opponent's choice, you can go to a category that you're going to pick up a couple steals on, but he's not going to get any points in,
Well,
and that's a real key strategy that he.
And one thing that I will say is that I find it interesting that Harry Potter was an eligible category for this match, because it seems like since Inner Geekdom has kicked off and really become what it is, the Inner Geekdom categories have kind of been phased out of the regular Schmoedown. Of course, we have comic book movies where you can get those MCU DC questions, but like thinking about Star Wars used to be on the wheel all the time in the early times of the singles division. But ever since the Inner Geekdom has really kicked off, you never see Star Wars in a singles match, or you never see it come up at rounds 1 or 3. Like, it's just basically reserved to Inner Geekdom and Star Wars. So it was interesting that Harry Potter was eligible for the singles match, but obviously it worked out for Paul.
So do you think it should have been like that should just be a broader category of in fantasy sci-fi?
Yeah, I think so.
Like Star Wars would be.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting question. That is an interesting question.
Yeah.
I didn't really think about that, but I also was surprised to see it on the wheel. I was like, that's strange. But
yeah, because I mean, when can you ever remember seeing it in a singles match recently?
I don't think I've ever seen it in a singles match. But one other thing that I do want to say in a talking point, I don't think we have to spend too much time on this, but I want to get your thoughts. Like, you talk about, it's clear now that Paul is up for any challenge. And, I think that in the grand scheme of things, and we've talked about this before, and I personally am not questioning whether or not Paul deserves to win the belt. Like, he won the belt and he's defended it now. He beat Dan Murrell for the belt, and he defended against, one of the best teams players of all time. But if you traded places and say you put someone like Clark Wolf winning the title and had the run that Paul had, would people be questioning whether she should legitimately be owning the title right now? I think that Paul's had a relatively easy run, and I just want some like self-referentiality that like people suck, and like if Paul weren't a guy, that it would be probably ridiculed a little bit more. Am I way off in my thinking there? Or?
No, I don't think so. Like, I think that I think you're right in what you're thinking, but I wouldn't say that Paul had an easy run. Like, I think maybe if Clark, I think people would accuse Clark of having had an easy run, but I don't think that that's true. Because I think he has had some tough matches in there. I think what you're saying is true, that there is a disparity in terms of critiquing of one gender more than others. But I don't know.
If Liz Shannon Miller had won the title and said, like, let's say she won that match against Paul, beat Dan, and was champion and defended against Snyder, I just think that people would be questioning whether or not she deserved to win it. Or like she deserved the belt because she didn't face anyone tough besides Dan.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I just think that it's either way, whoever is being accused, it's not true. Like, I don't see it as having an easy run. Regardless of who you're playing, I think to get to 6-0 is an incredible feat, something we've never seen done before, even amongst the greatest of players. So yeah, maybe he had one or two softer matches in there. Although, you have to look back at that first match he played against Brendan Meyer and say, man, that was probably one of his best wins, if we're being honest, because what Brendan Meyer has been able to do recently is pretty impressive. So
yeah, I agree. And obviously he had that win against Chance too. And Chance just had, we just talked about how amazing he was and has been in the teams division and could have a big run in the singles tournament right now. I do think that there's always, like, people mentally put an asterisk next to wins against rookies, right? Like, even if they're clearly good players and good wins, I think it's easily to mentally kind of put an asterisk by, like, well, he didn't play Bibiani, he didn't play Irwin, he didn't, you know what I mean? Like, for some reason, to be a valid champion, you have to go through like two or three of the greatest players of all time in order to be a real champion.
Yeah,
but we can move on from this.
Yeah, I think whatever the criteria for a real champion is, Paul has earned it at this point. But
I totally 100%. To be clear, I 100% agree.
Yeah, I know you do. Okay, let's talk now about our other singles tournament matches that we have gotten so far. We have had a couple. And let's talk about Brendan Meyer, since we just brought him up. He took on Whitney Seibold in a match that I think a lot of people were on the fence about how to pick it in our brackets. I know that we certainly were. Scott, you went with Whitney Seibold, and I went with the kid to make somewhat of a deep run to the semifinals, which I'm feeling even better about now that what happened at the top of this bracket happened. But this was a we talk about the masterclass and strategy from both Paul Oyama and Jeff Snyder that they play in their matches. This was the opposite of that from Whitney Seibold, who sort of just bulldozed his way through this match, guessing at 2 points to questions that he really did not seem to know the answer to, giving Brendan the chance for 2-point steals in one of his strengths, and then culminating with him on his 5-point question to stay in the match, kind of just giving up and saying a joke answer rather than, actually, trying to make some sort of an educated guess. Just gave a joke answer of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So not a great look from Whitney Seibold. I think what we've seen in his first 2 singles matches is that he's much better as a teams player. And I'm sure we're gonna get to see him as a teams player, probably in the teams tournament with Mark Edward Hoyk, his new partner.
What are the chances that they play Shazam in the first round?
Oh, that could be interesting. And so I could see, that team making some noise because obviously they had a tough match. They lost their only match in Anarchy last year, but it was a very tough match that came down to the end against, I believe, the Odd Couple, I want to say.
That's right.
Yeah. But yeah, an impressive match from Brendan nonetheless. He really took advantage of those steals that he had in round 2. Had, I think, 6 or 7 points coming out of round 1. And, was able to capitalize off of the obvious mistakes that Whitney made, which, you got to do if you want to contend in this league. So good win for Brendan.
It was a good win for Brendan. I was really impressed. I hate to take anything away from that win, and I don't mean to when I say this, but I was more caught off guard, less by his strong performance, and more just how not in the zone Whitney was, not just from a question answering and knowledge perspective, but to your point exactly, not at all thinking about the intricacies of the game. Like watching that match made me pretty much convinced that I'll never predict him to win a single. If he ever plays in singles again, I'll never predict him to win a singles match because that, is really, really poor, quite poor from him from the game perspective. Now, obviously, really smart guy, still knows a lot about movie trivias, and not all the questions went his way in terms of his particular knowledge. But he did not play to win, especially in that second and third round in particular. Win strategy, obviously, there isn't much strategy in round 1 besides just answer the question. When strategy became more important, and yeah, his head was not there. I don't know whether he just didn't study and didn't know that Brendan likes directors, or
it was Oscars, I believe,
or Oscars. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. Yeah, it was Oscars, and didn't know that Brendan likes Oscars. I remember that being on the tail of the tape in Brendan's first match, and so if he'd seen any of Brendan's matches, he'd know, or maybe even he got Spinner's Choice one time and took Oscars, maybe both. But I think that if he'd studied it all, he'd have known that was a category of strength, and Brendan was most likely going to get those questions right, regardless of whether or not he went to multiple choice. And you gotta do a little bit of damage control there. And then, yeah, throwing in the towel in round 3 is never a good look. Probably nothing will ever live up to the rage quit that Snyder had against Bibiani, but that's the closest that I've seen to that since then, and it was really disappointing. I think he's someone maybe like Snyder who really needs a manager to help him out in that. So if he's going to return to singles, he needs to find himself a faction, probably.
Yeah, or at the very least, a team partner.
Right. I just meant like if he returns to singles, he needs to find himself a manager.
Yes, if he returns to singles, you're right. So yeah, Brendan Meyer moving on, and he will face the person who is now becoming known as the upset queen in terms of the Ultimate Schmoedown tournament, and that is Stacey Howard, who knocked off Mark Riley. Christian would probably say that Mark was the top seed in the tournament, although I don't think that there was any seeding whatsoever.
Yeah.
There was some consideration of the rankings, I think, in forming some of these matchups, but
rough consideration. I agree.
Right. But Stacey, yeah, capitalize. Of course, we talk about this in our bracket predictions, how we have faith in her, and she a lot of times, and she's never able to come through. And so we both kind of felt like picking Riley was the way to go. And naturally, Stacey has one of those comeback matches here. I think supplanting her win against Mark Ellis as her best win in the Schmoedown now it was this win over Mark Riley. A match that Riley never really looked comfortable in. He gave away some points in round 2. It felt like he just his head wasn't quite in the game as it normally is. He wasn't as locked in as we have seen him at other times in this season. That being said, going into round 3, he pulls out his 5-pointer to take the lead, and you really think, well, that's it. Mark Riley's got it now. You think he's done what he had to do. He's survived. He's grinded it out. It goes to Stacy for her 5-pointer, and she's able to pull out the answer to his stepbrother's question, in very impressive fashion to claim the win. It was a dramatic match, came down to the end. But Riley, I think, we talked about the ups and downs that he's had in singles this year. I think this was kind of like his match against McQueenie almost, where he banked on a good round 3, bailing him out of maybe the danger that he had created for himself in rounds 1 and 2. And it worked out for him in that McQueenie match because Drew wasn't able to come up with his last couple of answers. But here, Stacy, didn't falter and continued, along with the momentum that she had built up during the match to hit that 5-pointer. And it's a great win for her and another notch in the belt of Corruption and what Grace and Ken have been doing over there with that faction. Very impressive.
It was an impressive win, and you got to give her props. She was, we talked about it on the prediction special, like you said, how every time Stacy comes up in a match, I can create an argument in my head that she's the person that I should pick to win it, and the one time that I don't predict her to win, she pulls out the victory. Go figure. But no, it was impressive. Mark didn't play like, to be fair, I don't think Mark played like he was the 1 seed in this match. You mentioned he seemed like a little bit off. I think he's someone who's really going to benefit from focus on the team's division with Who's the Boss coming back in the team's tournament. I mean, not having played since the Chicago live event back in April, I think it was. And so I think that is something that's going to help him refocus and get him back in the game. And I think that slight dip that we've seen maybe in his performance in this match, and you could argue maybe in some of his other singles matches this year, I think we're going to see that dip disappear, because I think he's at a point in his career where getting that extra little bit of motivation of having your partner by your side and winning the belt, not just for yourself, but for your team, for your teammate as well. I think that's the motivation that he needs and is going to get him up into that top tier of Schmoedown players again that we saw at the end of last season when Who's the Boss had their big run in the team's tournament then as well. So, that's a team, of course, being a huge Ben Bateman fan, that's a team that I'm really excited for, because I think all the pieces of the puzzle are there for Mark, and just having that, that extra 10% of motivation to get a belt for Ben, who's, someone who he's become really close to and clearly really enjoys playing with. I think that's going to make all the difference. For Stacy, I think that now she, as strong a win as this was, she's going to hope she doesn't repeat the 2017 Ultimate Schmoedown Singles Tournament in her quarterfinals performance in the next round. And, you could argue that Brendan Meyer maybe not as strong a player as Rachel Cushing. I think we're not sure about that. I think maybe the determination is still out there. It hasn't been made yet. He's had a couple good wins, and he's clearly putting in some good performances. And maybe he'll be as good as we currently view Rachel Cushing as in the singles and teams league in matches to come. We'll see if he comes good on that. But Stacy can definitely be proud of the way that she dug out this match. Was it a perfect performance? By no means, or by any means? No, it wasn't. But it's been better than any other performance we've had this year. And maybe that was because she hit her 5-pointer. Maybe that was because she just got different questions. You're right. Maybe it was because she had Rose with her at the table. Who the hell knows?
She had Julia Roberts in round 2. That definitely helped.
Hey, the wheel, I think that it's easy to forget when you watch a lot of teams in Intergeekdom matches where, half the matches that we watch normally are teams in Intergeekdom, how big of a difference the wheel makes in the singles match when you only get 4 questions, right? And you're on your own, and it makes all the difference in the top tier when everyone's getting most of their first round questions, right? And so Julia Roberts did make a huge difference, and can she pick that up if she can get those round 2 questions in her wheelhouse, or at least close to her wheelhouse, where she doesn't have to go to multiple choice on every question or guess. That's her downfalls have been on the wheel this year when she's gotten categories that don't jive with her knowledge. And we saw it against Janine when she got comedies instead of rom-coms. Maybe she's studying to fill those gaps. I don't know, but I think that she'll just need to put her head down and try to ride this momentum into the quarterfinal, into her quarterfinal match.
Absolutely. And Scott, someone else who we're going to see in the singles tournament is Paul Preston. And we've gotten to know Paul very well thanks to 3 matches that he played, 3 singles matches that he played in the month of August. He took on Rachel Silvestrini first. He then played Lon Harris, and finally took on David Del Rio. Of course, we first saw Paul with the Movie Guys team, who started out 0-1 after losing to Inky and the Brain. And he was clearly the stronger member of that team. And so I think we thought that maybe he was a good candidate for singles, and he's proven that he is. And across these 3 matches, he did drop the match to Lon Harris, but we talked about this a little bit in our bracket predictions. It was one of those matches where he kind of controlled things for most of the match, and it didn't feel. Lon just stuck around enough to stay in the game, hit his 5-pointer. It didn't feel like Paul really deserved to lose that match, or that he could have lost that match, but he did, and yet was able to rebound and get a win against David Del Rio in a match that he started off far behind in. David Del Rio with the perfect first round, but then completely melted down in round 2. Paul had a ton of steals, and was able to bang out his category as well pretty strongly, and put David away in the 3rd round to earn his spot in the singles tournament. Personally, he probably should have earned that spot a lot earlier, given the criteria that it seems to make this tournament. We did have 2 people who were 0-1 in the tournament. I'm not sure why Paul had to play as many matches that he did to get in the tournament, but nevertheless, he is in the tournament, and I'm excited to see him there because I like the dude bro personality that he has created for himself as the powder keg. It's definitely a funny character. I love the gag of him when he walks out and he already has an answer written down on his board. Of course, when a question hasn't been asked yet, and he's going to get that rematch against Lon Harris. If you want to know what we thought about that, go back and watch our bracket special. But Paul's an interesting player, Scott, that I wouldn't be surprised if he makes a run in this tournament.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. He's clearly very talented, very knowledgeable. We saw that, as you mentioned, in the team's match with the Movie Guy. We even, I guess you could say we saw it first on the free for all. But we finally get to see him in 3 singles matches. No idea why he played so many matches. Totally agree with your point on that front. But Rachel Silvestrini, we expected him to win that match. That match was probably even closer than I thought it would be. But he got the win there, and you're right. Eked out a loss to Lon Harris. Lon just pulled it out in the end, but then had that crazy weird match with Del Rio where he was down. He wasn't down big, I guess, but he was down a few points at the end of round 1 because Diamond Dave had that spectacular round 1, getting that perfect round. And then one of those rare instances where he managed to collect more points off of Dave's questions in round 2 than Dave did, which is never a good position to be in if you're the person who's being asked the questions. And so from there, he kind of rode that to victory, which was good. And I'm glad he ended up in the singles tournament. You're right. I'm totally on board with you saying that he's a new personality in the league that I'm really liking, especially in terms of people who have more defined characters. I mean, I love Brendan Meyer, but he doesn't have that much of a character. He's just kind of the kid, a lovable kid, which doesn't really feel like he's acting all. Whereas like Paul, I feel like Paul's actually doing something with this character. I hope that they develop Brendan a little bit more on that front and get a little bit more interesting. But if you think of the other more, quote unquote, more defined characters in the league, really, from terms of singles division at least, it's really Video, Drew, and Paul, in my opinion, have the strongest personalities and characters that we've seen that are new to the league this season. I think that, of course, Oyama has a character of his own, but it also just feels like maybe that's not his wheelhouse. But Paul's clearly that's in his wheelhouse, and I really like what they're doing with it, and all the more reason to make sure that he's in the singles tournament.
Yeah, something interesting to think about, too, with that Del Rio match, Scott, and I think maybe I heard them talking about this on, maybe it was Call to Action, about the fact that Del Rio was not going to play in the singles tournament if he had won this match. And so if he had won, he was going to give his spot to somebody. Who do you think he was going to give it to? Yeah, it's just something weird to think about. I mean, I'm sure there was a plan in place.
They're definitely. I realized that I shrugged and I didn't actually make any audio sense into the podcast. That's dumb. I have no idea. I have no idea who.
Because he doesn't have a faction. He doesn't have any teams. We haven't seen him in any cut scenes.
And he wasn't going to be around the rest of the season anyway. So, like, if he was joining a faction, it didn't mean anything because he wasn't going to be here for the rest of the year.
Yeah, something to think about, but yeah, I guess I don't really have any answers. There's not really any clues to go off of, but interesting nonetheless.
I was wondering if it'd be like another rookie or something like that, like someone else who is new to the league. But
Video Drew, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, that would be weird though. Like Liz Shannon Miller's in the tournament, Brendan Meyer's in the tournament. Like who else would there be to give it to? I don't know.
Demi Adiji eBay.
Is he still in New Zealand? I mean, I don't even know.
That's true. He was at the New Zealand Film Festival for a while.
I mean, he's been
I
in New
don't.
Zealand since like March or April,
I,
actually.
I don't know if we're going to be seeing him back for a while, unfortunately, but it happens. Okay, Scott. In addition to the big teams match which we had one other teams match, and that was, of course, this match between the family and Inky and the Brain. Right back, or I'm sorry, between the family and quote unquote only stupid answers that we had all the way back at the start of the month on August 1st. We saw from the thumbnail of this match that Sam Basher, who is DJ Wooldridge's normal partner on Only Stupid Answers, was not going to be playing in the match. So there was kind of a big question mark there about who was going to be playing in the match. And soon we discovered that Robert Adams from Cinefanatics was invited from the crowd to play with DJ Wooldridge in this match against Andrew Guy and Drew McQueenie. And Scott, you have to say he started off slow. I believe he couldn't come up with the answer to his 3 or 4 point question to his first 3 or 4 questions that he had in round one. But he once, it is true what they say that first question, first right answer is the one that matters the most, because it seemed like once he did get his first right answer, things did sort of kick into gear for him. He had a decent round 2 helping out DJ. Answered his question in round 3, and I believe he even helped his team answer the 5-pointer in round 3 to prevent a TKO.
I think that was all him on the 5-point question.
Yeah. And however, though, they were up against a stronger team in the family. Drew McQueenie and Drew Guy, 2 guys that I don't necessarily root for very often when they're playing in singles, but I'm finding them to be a fun partnership in teams, and when complimented by their manager, Robert Meyer Burnett, I think they could do some damage in the team tournament for sure. I think that their knowledge complements each other very well. With Drew, definitely more well versed in some of the older movies that classics in '80s and stuff like that. Maybe Guy doesn't have as strong of a base in, being a younger competitor, and vice versa. So I think that they could be an interesting team. Only Stupid Answers. I think that maybe we're going to see them in the tournament. I want to say that there was something about that in the interview that Sam will be back for the tournament. So shout out to them. They're 1-2. I'm not sure whether they're going to be able to pull off any upsets as strong as the team division is. But it was fun to see a fan get a chance. It was fun to see Robert get his chance in the ring, and acquit himself very nicely. So shout out to him for that. And shout out to the Schmoedown for making that happen.
Yeah, it was a tough introduction to the white hot spotlight of the movie trivia Schmoedown for sure. But I mean, I'd say he more than acquitted himself. I think he ended up having a just as good, if not better, match than DJ. Towards in the second half, of course, it's hard to discount the 3 or 4 points that you just immediately throw in the trash when you miss them at the start. Not that he should have known all the answers to those questions, but probably is kicking himself for a couple of them or so. But yeah, no, I think he did so well in the back half of the match that it's hard to beat him up too much, because I think they had video game movies. Maybe they had a pretty tough or round 2 category that I think that he really helped out with.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, something like that.
It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. When I saw it in the rundown for the show today, I was like, oh yeah, that match happened.
I forgot that happened. Yeah,
I forgot that happened. Yeah, so I think it was a crowd pleasing match more than it will have an impact on anything that we see that happen for the rest of the season. But it's nice to have those sprinkled in.
Indeed. Okay, Scott, before we talk about one little bit of kayfabe to close, we have a couple of Inner Geekdom matches to talk about. Triple threat match between the Warfather, Chandru Dandapani, and who was the other player in this match?
David Moore.
David Moore, right. The Warfather obviously making his debut with an amusing character, it must be said. And, all 3 players playing pretty well in this match. I think David Moore, obviously came up against Kevin Smets in his first match and couldn't do much about that. But I think showed more of what he's capable of in this match. I believe in his second round, he got a category. I want to say it was Star Trek that he was not as comfortable with or strong in, and yet was able to grind out 4 or 5 points in this round. I remember thinking, oh, he might be screwed when he got that category, but he was able to acquit himself nicely and get himself in contention there in round 3. as was the Warfather making his debut, probably the weakest out of these three players, but certainly not the weakest that we have seen in the Intergeekdom division. This season or in past seasons, I think sometimes people get into the game without knowing what they're getting into in this Intergeekdom division. But I don't, we don't really know much about who he really is. But I imagine he's a fan, and it probably seemed like, it did seem like he had a decent base in the game, and so he knew what to expect when he got into Intergeekdom, and he handled himself pretty nicely. But Chandru, I think, I did think going into this match that he was probably the favorite, obviously with the Warfather being a wild card. But he had a close match in his first match again. That 4-way match in which he played it with Brandon Hanna. It was a close match. But he was impressive, and he was impressive again here to get the win. And come out of this triple threat match and then move on to face Jared Haben, someone who we hadn't seen all this season, but who had a couple of, he will always have that great distinction of being 1-0 with 4 knockouts after that 5-way match. He
truly legendary. He should have quit. He shouldn't even played another match.
He really should have, especially because I don't think he's won a match since then. But
he hasn't, unfortunately.
But he's a nice guy. It's great to see him in the Schmoedown. But yeah, he didn't have his strongest match here. He's been out of the league for a while. I think it showed. Someone like Chandru, I think, was just a little more hungry. Being a fan as well, Chandru. And he got the win, and now is going to get his rematch against Brandon Hanna. And I think maybe in a one-on-one format, Brandon Hanna is going to have more difficult of a time than he did with Chandru in the 5-way format.
Yeah. I think that that's definitely fair to say. I think that Chandru, it's always weird when you have those 3 ways, 4 ways, 5 ways, because there's so many additional dynamics with stealing going on. It ends up being a very different game because of the round 2 dynamics. And I think that Chandru will benefit from just having it be a one-on-one. He even said that in his interview, I think, after the match as well. And to your point, I think, the Warfather, David Moore, they were there having a good time. They are good enough players, certainly, to be in the Schmoedown. And I think David Moore might even be underrated because, it's Kevin Smith. That was the person that he debuted against, getting TKO'd. But notable in that he was the only person to not be completely KO'd by Kevin Smith until Kalinowski just edged him out on that final question in the number 1 contenders match. So David Moore, at least compared to everyone else, including a former champion NJ Washington, is acquitted himself nicely, relatively speaking, to those other performances. And so I was maybe a little bit more cagey on whether or not David Moore might be able to give Chandru a run for his money, even though I did think Chandru was the favorite. I think that David Moore probably didn't prepare as much as Chandru had for the match, which was probably ultimately the difference. And that's fine. He was there to have a good time. He put on a good show, and I really enjoyed seeing the dynamic of him and the Warfather in particular, because they were just there joking, laughing, having a good time. And, we don't want everyone in the league to be like Mike Kalinowski or Kevin Smets. That'll just be a little bit too much. And so it's good to have personalities like the Warfather. Like,
you got to have the Wildberries in there too.
You got to have the Wildberries. 100%. That's exactly right. People come to watch the Schmoedown not just for the incredible movie trivia performance that you get from people like Kalinowski, Cushing, Smets, etc. And particularly talking about Intergeekdom here, but they also come for fun matches that you get, like even like Tom Dagnino against Robert Meyer Burnett, the lowest scoring match of all time, probably. Fun match to watch. Still hilarious match to watch. What'd you say?
Wildberries equal ratings.
They do, though. They do. They sell T-shirts on TeePublic. You can find them over there now. But yeah, no, I think that it was fun to watch for that reason. And then he's going to get that rematch against Brandon Hanna because Brandon Hanna defeated Emily Rose Jacobson.
That's right.
In her second match. You talked about we've seen worse debut performances in the Schmoedown, and I think that we might particularly be talking about one of from a winning, at least from people who have won their debut match, maybe one of the worst showings that we'd seen in her first match against. She played the guy from. I'm sorry.
Winston Marshall.
Yes, Winston Marshall. I was about to say Wilfred. I'm like, that's not right. Winston Marshall. Yeah, who also had a rough introduction to the Intergeekdom. But just quickly transition to that match because I know we're dragging on a little bit here. I think Emily Rose Jacobson acquitted herself. A lot of acquitting that has been happening in this episode. She acquitted herself very nicely.
Yeah.
She acquitted herself very nicely from that first match. I was worried. I was concerned for her because Brandon Hanna clearly had put in a very strong performance, and he put in another very strong performance in this match. But she gave a much more respectable performance. Again, maybe not the best round one, which set her back a little bit relative to Brandon Hanna, but really did a great job in round two, and then also answering a couple of her questions in round three as well, I believe. So strong performance from her, and I feel better about her getting more matches in the league after that. Which there's these two tiers of the Schmoedown. I think there's Kevin Smets, Rachel Cush, well, R.I.P. Rachel Cushing, Mike Kalinowski, Mara Konopik. Maybe we'll see if she's as strong as she is coming back as she was last year. I expect she will be. And then everyone else, you got Adam Lavick, Sean Drew, Brandon Hanna, that league. And I think Emily Rose Jacobson fits in that second tier. And I think there's a place for that second tier in the Schmoedown.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's necessary to keep this Intergeekdom division competitive for sure. Okay, Scott, before we close, let's talk about one bit of kayfabe, the big bit of kayfabe, I guess you would say, from this month. Yeah. Robert Meyer Burnett, in his final act as commissioner, has come up with what he has deemed the nuke. And we saw scenes with him running it by both Roxy Stryer and Christian Harloff. Christian reacting like, you're crazy, but I like this. Let's do it. And yeah, I think there's a lot of speculation about what this is going to be. At first, I think we thought maybe something with the teams tournament, because we haven't heard a lot about the teams tournament. The bracket, who all is going to be in it. That's
what I thought too.
It's a little bit clouded, but I think Christian maybe shed a little bit of light on that with a Facebook post that he had yesterday or the day before. Yep. In which he said that the nuke is going to make people very excited about next season. So something that's going to affect season 7 of the Schmoedown. I don't know if this is going to have something to do with the live event. Scott, do you have any inkling about what this might be, given now that it seems that it's going to have implications on season 7?
Scott, I can't say that I have much confidence in what I think it might be doing, but the best thing that I can come up with, because it completely changed my mindset about it when, exactly what you shared, Christian dropped that little tidbit that it's going to get people really excited for next season. And all that I can think of, and I can't get my mind off of it, even though I don't necessarily believe it, is that it's going to change the structure of the leagues. We didn't necessarily get a change in the structure of the leagues last season, although we did, of course, get 2 different commissioners who run those 2 different ships. I think that what we might see next season is either a new league or a breaking up of the league into multiple divisions, changing the structure of the leagues in that way. Maybe I don't necessarily think it's going to be tiers, but maybe like an East-West sort of thing, making it more of a structure that way and having round robin within the league. I'm not sure. I don't necessarily believe this because I just don't know what to think about it. And Christian always does a good job keeping you on your toes, and always guessing and not always being right either. And I think I'm going to end up being wrong on this one. But when I think about, okay, what's going to change the way I feel and how am I going to get excited about next season? It's probably going to be a structural thing. Last season, to your point exactly, the structural thing was introducing live events every month, whether they're on the road or whether they're in the studios with a Schmoedown Throwdown, getting a live event every month. They can't really do much more with that. You know what I mean? Like, they can't really much. I mean, maybe they can go to more live events, but they can't.
Yeah, because Christian has been saying like 12 to 15 live events or something he wants to try and have next year.
Yeah, that's his goal, because he recognizes that the live events are the lifeblood of the actual movie trivia, right? Of course, the Patreon helping fund all of that, but the things that get the most hype and the most attention this channel are those live events, and so trying to get more of those. But that's not a structural change anymore. We already have the live events. Adding more of them is not a structural change, and so I'm trying to figure out and think about what could be that change in the same mold of adding live events, and I can't really come up with anything more than restructuring the leagues. I just need to think more about it. Maybe we'll get some drop of a few other hints as the months roll on, as we get closer to the end of the season. But right now, that's where I'm stuck.
Yeah, I don't know. When I think about the nuke, I do think about something kind of like you've hinted at, because I think about stuff getting blown up, right? What is there to blown up? I've also thought about maybe like all of the belts being stripped from their respective holders, and it just being sort of a free for all, with everyone sort of back in contention to claim a belt. I
don't know if that would get me excited about next season.
I don't know either.
I think Christian then would just be wrong about what would get me excited.
Yeah. What I do know is that, to that point you've made here, every time Christian has said you're going to get excited about something, he's been right. It is something to get excited about. Whether it's Anarchy last year really delivered, I think. The horse going back to the Horseman reveal that happened. Every time Christian makes a big deal about something, some bit of kayfabe, it always delivers. I've learned to trust in what they create, and I have a feeling that whenever we find out what this is, it's probably going to be something that we haven't thought of, and it's probably going to be awesome. And so I'm excited, and I'm glad that we're already looking ahead to season 7, and
it just shows how many steps ahead.
Yeah,
it just shows how many steps ahead Christian is thinking and how much of a master of his craft he is. And
he's like Kevin Feige.
Give him a Marvel movie.
Let's do it.
No, forget Marvel movie. Give him Masters of the Universe. That's what he really wants.
Yeah, seriously. Him and Riley. Okay, Scott, that should just about do it for this episode of Champs Lunch. We hope you have enjoyed either watching or listening to this episode. If you have, don't forget about our Patreon page, patreon.com/MediaPlugPods. You can support us over there. If you can't support us, that's fine too. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, do all the things on the podcast feed or on YouTube, wherever. And don't forget to check out our other podcasts as well. Some Like It, Scott. We'll be putting out weekly podcasts. We just put out that Best of the Decade, and It Chapter 2 is coming next week. So big things ahead for the main podcast for the rest of the year.
Ahead of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we'll be back next month at the end of September to talk about the next batch of Schmoedown action. But until then, I've been Scott Harvey for Scott Shelton. We will see you next time.
Champs Lunch. Cool.